It was an ordinary morning when Mia Smith's simple, quiet life was turned upside down. She stood at the counter of her small cafe, serving coffee with a smile to the regulars who came in for their morning fix. She wasn't rich or famous. She wasn't anything remarkable. But to the people who knew her, Mia was a warm soul who made everyone feel at home. Her life was simple, until that fateful moment. The door of the cafe chimed as the tall, sharply dressed man entered. He looked like he belonged in a different world. The room seemed to grow quieter, the air colder, as his presence commanded attention. His name was Luca DeMarco, a name whispered in the darkest corners of the city, dangerous, powerful, and cold as ice. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of him, of course. Every rumor, every story about him sent shivers down her spine. But she never imagined she would meet him in person. Not here, not in her humble cafe. Luca's eyes scanned the room with indifference until they landed on her. His gaze was sharp, assessing. He approached the counter with a purposeful stride, and the air seemed to grow heavier with each step. "Are you Mia Smith?" His voice was calm, authoritative, with an edge of command that unsettled her. Mia blinked, surprised. "Why yes. Can I help you?" "I'm Luca DeMarco." "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, yet there was something in his eyes that suggested a deeper layer of meaning. Mia didn't have time to think before he placed a document on the counter, its contents unknown. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, instinctively, almost as if her body had already accepted what her mind was too afraid to comprehend. "I need you to marry me," Luca said, his gaze unwavering. The contract marriage proposal, Mia's mind raced. Was this a joke? A prank? But Luca's expression was serious, his eyes steely. He wasn't playing. He wasn't joking. He was proposing a marriage contract. A marriage for the sole purpose of securing his business empire and his legacy. There were no romantic feelings in this proposition, just business. "I don't understand," Mia stammered, feeling the weight of the situation crashing down on her. "It's simple," Luca continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I need a legitimate heir, and I need the legitimacy of a marriage to secure my position. You'll be well compensated for your cooperation. You'll live in luxury, and I'll provide for everything. All I ask in return is that you give me a child. A legitimate heir." Mia was speechless. What was he asking? Was he serious? Her mind was swirling, the words tumbling in and out of focus. How could someone so cold and calculating ask her, a simple girl from a quiet town, to enter into such an arrangement? To marry him for nothing but his legacy? "You're asking me to marry you, for a baby?" Mia finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca nodded, his eyes still fixed on her. "Yes. But it's more than just a baby. It's about securing my empire and my future. You won't be doing this alone. You'll have everything you need. You won't want for anything." Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She looked at the contract in front of her, then back up at Luca's unreadable expression. There was no warmth in his eyes, no sign of affection. It was purely business. A cold, calculated arrangement. Mia wasn't naive. She knew that life had never been kind to her. She had grown up with humble beginnings, working hard for every penny she earned. This was an opportunity that could change her life forever. But the price of that change was steep. Could she really go through with this? Could she marry a man she didn't love, for the sake of his empire, and have a child as a mere formality? Her mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears. She wasn't sure what to do. But one thing was clear, this was her chance to escape the life she had known. The life where she worked tirelessly, barely scraping by. She could have everything. Luxury. Stability. A future she had never dreamed of. Think of it as a temporary arrangement, Luca's voice cut through her thoughts. You'll live a life most could only dream of. No more struggles. No more worries. And when the child is born, our agreement will be complete. Mia's heart hammered in her chest. She was about to make a decision that would change her life forever. With trembling hands, Mia picked up the pen and signed the contract, her signature flowing across the paper. She felt a strange sense of finality as she did so, like a door slamming shut on the life she once knew. Luca nodded, his eyes scanning the contract before lifting his gaze back to her. Good. You've made the right decision. There was no warmth in his words. No sign of kindness. It was just business. But Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would shape her future in ways she could never have imagined. As Luca turned to leave, he glanced back over his shoulder, his voice soft but commanding. We'll begin tomorrow. Don't make this more complicated than it has to be. And just like that, Mia's life as she knew it was over. She had signed a contract to marry a man she didn't know, a man who seemed to care nothing for her, for the sake of a future she couldn't even begin to fathom. The following morning, Mia found herself standing in front of the towering mansion that was now her new home. The vast, imposing gates stood before her, almost as if they were guarding a world she could never belong to. She couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in her stomach as she stared up at the marble pillars and polished windows. Everything about this place screamed power and wealth. Everything except her. Mia had spent the entire night tossing and turning, her mind replaying the events from the day before. Had she really signed a contract to marry Luca DeMarco? A man she barely knew, someone whose life seemed so out of reach, so detached from her own. She could still hear his calm, indifferent voice, promising her a life of luxury. But what did that really mean for her? Mia? A voice broke her thoughts, and she turned to see a tall woman with a friendly smile approaching her. She was dressed in an elegant, form-fitting black dress, her hair neatly styled. I'm Isabella. Luca asked me to show you around. Isabella's voice was warm, and her eyes had a kindness in them that Mia hadn't expected. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad after all. Isabella guided Mia through the grand mansion, pointing out the luxurious features of the estate, the crystal chandeliers, the sprawling garden, the grand staircase leading to the upper levels. Every room was more stunning than the last, with elegant furniture, towering bookshelves, and intricate paintings adorning the walls. Mia felt like she was in a dream. She had never seen anything like this in her entire life. Luca is very particular about the house, Isabella explained as they walked through a sitting room with velvet couches and a grand piano by the window. Everything has to be perfect, just the way he likes it. But you'll get used to it. Mia nodded, taking in the sheer opulence of the place. I'm not sure I'll ever get used to this, she said softly. Isabella smiled, understanding. It's a lot to take in, but don't worry. You'll find your place here. She paused before adding, Luca has a way of making people feel like they belong, even if they're not sure they do. The next few days passed in a blur. Mia settled into the guest suite that was now hers. The room was beautifully decorated, with soft white linens and a breathtaking view of the estate's sprawling gardens. The luxury of it all was overwhelming, yet it felt so foreign to her. She had never imagined living in such a place. The house staff treated her with the utmost respect, catering to her every need, but Mia couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Her days were spent in the mansion, where Isabella would bring her breakfast and chat with her, trying to make her feel more comfortable. Luca, on the other hand, remained distant. He wasn't around much, often caught up in business meetings or phone calls. But when he was present, he seemed aloof, as if he were always thinking about something else. He rarely engaged in conversation with Mia unless it was strictly necessary. One afternoon, Mia found herself standing by the grand windows, staring out at the sprawling gardens below. The silence in the house was deafening. She had come to realize that luxury didn't feel as fulfilling as she had imagined. The mansion was cold, despite its beauty. She was isolated, with nothing but her thoughts for company. Her thoughts were interrupted when Luca entered the room, his presence like a shadow. He walked toward her, his steps confident, purposeful. Mia tensed as he came to stand beside her, looking out at the garden. His expression was unreadable, his face as cold as ever. He didn't speak for a moment, and Mia wasn't sure if she was supposed to say something. "I'm sorry," she blurted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong here. I feel so out of place." Luca turned to look at her, his gaze sharp, though not unkind. "You belong here because you signed a contract. This is part of the agreement. You're part of this world now. It's just a matter of adjusting." His words were simple, but they stung. Mia felt a pang in her chest, as if the weight of her decision had just settled fully on her shoulders. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. "I just need time." "You'll have plenty of time," Luca said, his tone neutral. "And when the time comes, we'll fulfill our part of the agreement." He didn't elaborate further, and Mia watched as he walked away, disappearing into the hallway. She stood there for a long time after, staring at the vast garden, wondering if she would ever find her place in this world. As the weeks passed, Mia's feelings for Luca remained unchanged. He was a man of few words, and whenever they did speak, it was always about the contract, about the baby that would eventually come. She had to remind herself every day that this was all temporary, that she had agreed to this for the sake of a future she had never dreamed of. But the more she observed Luca, the more she began to wonder about him. He wasn't the cold, heartless man she had expected. There were moments when she caught a glimpse of something else, something softer, something human. One evening, as she sat at the dinner table alone, she found herself staring at the empty chair across from her. Luca hadn't joined her for dinner that night. The loneliness she had been feeling suddenly became overwhelming, and she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest. Was she really just a pawn in this arrangement, or was there more to this than she had realized? Mia's routine had settled into an uncomfortable pattern. The mansion had become both a refuge and a prison. The days passed in a blur of luxury that never quite felt like home, and evenings spent in solitude or under Luca's distant gaze. She had learned the ropes of her new life, where the important rooms were, when Luca would be absent for meetings, and how to manage the silence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. One late morning, Mia was in the library when Luca's voice echoed from the doorway. "Mia, we need to talk." Mia turned to face him, her heart immediately quickening in her chest. It wasn't often that Luca approached her with words like that. His voice was serious, a tone she wasn't used to hearing. "What about?" she asked, attempting to mask the nervousness creeping into her tone. Luca stepped into the room, his sharp eyes meeting hers. His expression was unreadable. "The contract," he began. "It's time to discuss the next step. We have a few things to finalize." They sat across from each other in the grand library, the thick leather-bound books surrounding them like silent witnesses to the conversation that Mia knew would shape the rest of her life. Luca had always been businesslike, but today there was something almost calculating in his demeanor. "I've arranged for a doctor to come by tomorrow," Luca explained, his gaze never wavering from hers. "We need to make sure the terms of our agreement are moving forward as planned." Mia blinked, confused. "What do you mean? You've been talking about the baby, but..." He interrupted her, his voice firm. "Mia, you need to be pregnant soon. I need an heir. That was part of our deal. We'll have the doctor here tomorrow to confirm everything. The sooner you're pregnant, the better for both of us." The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. He was so cold, so detached. As if this was just another transaction, another deal to close. He wasn't asking her how she felt, or even considering her emotions. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She nodded, feeling a pang of bitterness rising inside her. "Fine. If that's what you want." Luca's face softened for a brief moment, though his eyes still held the same cold, calculating look. "It's not just what I want, Mia. It's what's necessary. For both of us. This marriage needs to be legitimate. No one can know that this is just a contract. It has to look real. As the days passed, Mia found herself caught between her growing awareness of Luca's true motives and the strange, conflicting emotions she was beginning to feel. She had signed the contract with the understanding that it was just a business arrangement. But now, with Luca's insistence on the baby, things were becoming more real than she had anticipated. Mia spent most of her time in the mansion, going through her new routine, avoiding the questions that swirled in her mind. What would happen once she was pregnant? Would this still just be a contract, or would Luca's feelings start to change? She hadn't expected to feel anything for him. He was a man driven by power, a man who looked at life through the lens of business and strategy. But as the days went on, she began to notice things she hadn't before: the quiet way he moved through the house, the subtle kindness in his gestures, even the fleeting glances that sometimes softened his expression. There were moments when he wasn't the cold, distant CEO, but a man who seemed almost human. Yet those moments were fleeting. Luca remained focused on their contract, the terms they had agreed upon. Nothing more, nothing less. The day the doctor arrived was an uncomfortable one. Mia had barely slept the night before, her nerves frayed. She was unsure of what to expect, unsure of what Luca wanted from her. The doctor was polite but efficient, conducting the necessary tests and asking Mia questions she wasn't ready to answer. Luca stood by, his posture stiff, his attention unwavering. He made no attempt to comfort Mia, no attempt to ease the tension. The doctor finished his work quickly, handing Luca a report that confirmed the baby would be their next step. Mia, Luca said once the doctor had left. It's time to start preparing for what comes next. Later that evening, Mia found herself alone in the living room, the silence settling around her like a blanket. She was lost in her thoughts, the overwhelming weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that she hadn't stopped to think about what this arrangement would really mean for her. Luca entered the room then, his presence as commanding as always. He seemed to hesitate for a brief moment before speaking. "Mia," he began softly. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. I understand if you're feeling confused. But I need you to trust me. This is the only way we can secure the future." Mia met his gaze, feeling a strange pull in her chest. For the first time, she saw something deeper in his eyes, something that wasn't just cold calculation. There was a hint of something softer there, something more vulnerable. "I don't know if I can," Mia whispered, her voice faltering. Luca studied her for a moment, then slowly nodded. "I won't force you to trust me. But I need you to understand that this is the way forward. For both of us." The words hung in the air between them. Mia felt the weight of them, but she didn't know what to say. For now, she was caught in a web of her own making, a contract that had begun as a simple business transaction but was slowly turning into something more complicated. Mia awoke to the sound of the morning bell, the soft chime echoing through the mansion like a silent reminder of the new day ahead. The weight of the previous night's conversation with Luca lingered heavily in her mind. His words, so calm and firm, had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She had signed up for a contract, an agreement to bear his child. But in those fleeting moments of tenderness, in the subtle ways he'd looked at her, something else had seemed to stir beneath the surface. With a deep breath, Mia pushed the thoughts aside. Today, she had decided, would be like any other. She would wake up, go through her routine, and avoid questioning anything too deeply. It was easier that way. But as the day unfolded, she found that nothing could keep her from the storm that was beginning to brew within her. As Mia descended the grand staircase into the sprawling dining hall, she was greeted by the usual scene, the polished, luxurious space where Luca always sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding yet composed. The staff moved quickly, placing plates and serving hot coffee, as if to maintain a quiet routine in the midst of the underlying tension. Luca looked up as she entered, his eyes meeting hers with a seriousness that seemed to have become a constant in their interactions. He was dressed in his usual impeccable suit, the sharp lines of his clothing accentuating his commanding presence. "Mia," Luca greeted her, his voice low, but the way his gaze lingered on her made her feel exposed. "I've arranged for us to visit the estate today. We need to begin preparations. After all, we'll be needing a proper environment for the baby soon." Mia's heart skipped a beat. The estate? What could it mean for her, and more importantly, for their relationship? She had never really asked Luca about the estate, he had simply mentioned it in passing when they first discussed their contract. But now, it seemed more important than ever. She nodded, unsure of what to say. "Of course. I'll be ready." The ride to the estate, the drive to the estate was a quiet one. The sleek, black car glided down the winding roads as Mia stared out of the window, lost in thought. The sprawling greenery outside the window seemed to stretch endlessly, mirroring the way her life had expanded into this new, uncharted territory. Luca, however, remained absorbed in his thoughts, his fingers lightly drumming on the armrest, a faraway look in his eyes. Mia couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. Was he contemplating the future they would have together? Was he worried about the baby or the legitimacy of their union? She had no answers, only questions that seemed to grow with every passing day. They arrived at the estate, and Mia was immediately struck by its grandeur. The mansion was even more magnificent than the one they lived in, with sprawling gardens, marble fountains, and columns that towered above her like a piece of history. It was a palace, a symbol of wealth and power, and she couldn't help but feel out of place standing in its shadow. Luca led her inside, guiding her through the rooms, showing her the grand hallways and opulent decor. As they walked, the silence between them felt heavier than ever, and Mia's nerves began to fray. She had no idea why they were here, and Luca's insistence on the baby only made her feel more like an outsider in a life she hadn't signed up for. "Is this where the baby will be raised?" Mia finally asked, her voice soft but laced with uncertainty. Luca paused, his eyes flicking to hers. For a moment, there was a hint of something in his gaze, something that made Mia's heart beat faster. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. "It's the most secure place," he replied smoothly, his voice steady. "I want everything to be perfect for the child." The estate's purpose. As they toured the estate, Luca showed Mia the nursery, already furnished with the finest furniture and baby essentials. Mia felt a knot form in her stomach. This was all happening so fast, too fast. The baby. The marriage. The future that had been planned for her, without her consent. "Mia," Luca said as he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're not just carrying my child. You're carrying my legacy. This marriage is important, not just for us, but for the empire I've built. Everything we do from here on out will have consequences, and we have to ensure that everything we do is seen as legitimate." Mia nodded, trying to steady herself. She had always known that this marriage wasn't just about love, it was a business arrangement. But hearing Luca speak of it in such cold terms, as though her feelings didn't matter, made her feel smaller than she ever had before. "Do you want this?" Mia asked before she could stop herself. The question hung in the air between them, and Luca's gaze hardened slightly. He looked at her, his eyes piercing. "I do. I need it." Later that evening, after their visit to the estate, Mia found herself alone in the garden, staring at the stars above. The night air was cool, the moon casting a soft glow over the sprawling grounds. She felt strangely calm in this moment, as though the world had paused, giving her the space to breathe. Luca appeared beside her, his presence as commanding as ever. He didn't speak right away but stood next to her, his eyes on the sky. For a moment, they simply existed together in silence, a shared stillness that felt more intimate than any conversation could. "I don't want this to just be a contract," Luca said suddenly, his voice low. "I don't want it to feel fake. I know it was an arrangement, but I need it to be real. For the baby. For the future." Mia turned to face him, her heart racing. His words felt like a confession, raw and unexpected. It was the first time he had opened up in any meaningful way, and it shook her more than she wanted to admit. "I'm just trying to figure out who I am in all of this," Mia replied softly, her voice trembling. "I never asked for this life. I never asked for any of it." Luca nodded slowly, his eyes softening just slightly. "I know. I'm sorry." Mia stood by the window, watching the early morning light spill across the mansion's sprawling grounds. The world outside was still, but inside, everything felt restless. It had been a few days since their visit to the estate, and Luca's words lingered in her mind. He didn't just want a contract marriage, he wanted it to be real. And for the first time, Mia wasn't sure what that meant for her. It was a cold truth, one she had been avoiding for weeks. She was no longer simply a pawn in this carefully orchestrated game. Luca's intentions, though clear in their business-like approach, were beginning to blur. He wasn't just the stoic CEO anymore, he was someone she couldn't ignore. And she had a sinking feeling that he knew her better than she realized. As she turned away from the window, she was met with the sight of Luca standing in the doorway, watching her quietly. His presence was commanding, yet there was a softness to his expression that felt out of place in his usual world of business deals and contract. The air was thick with unspoken words, words that neither of them seemed ready to say. "I never expected this," Mia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she picked at her food. Luca looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean? This life? This arrangement? I never thought I'd be here, sitting in this house, with all these expectations weighing on me. And yet, here I am." There was a long pause as Luca set down his fork, studying her intently. "I never expected it either. But sometimes, Mia, life throws things at you that you don't plan for." She met his gaze, seeing something raw in his eyes. He wasn't the man who had first approached her with the contract. This was someone else, someone she hadn't yet figured out. "You don't have to pretend with me, Luca," she said softly. "I know this isn't just about the baby. It's about the empire. Your legacy." He looked away for a moment, taking a deep breath. It was. At first. But, he trailed off, and for the first time since their arrangement began, there was uncertainty in his voice. "But things change, Mia." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Luca stood up from the table, his hand gripping the edge of his chair. He turned to face her, his voice steady but with a hint of something deeper. "I mean, I'm starting to realize that I don't want this just because it's expected. I want it because I want you." Mia's breath caught in her throat. His words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, as the space between them seemed to close. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, and the only thing that mattered was the intensity of their shared gaze. Later that night, as Mia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the weight of Luca's confession. He had said he wanted her. But what did that mean for her? Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? She turned onto her side, closing her eyes, and tried to calm her racing thoughts. This was still a contract, a business arrangement. But something had changed, and Mia wasn't sure what it meant for their future. In the quiet of the night, Mia realized that no matter how much she tried to deny it, she was beginning to care for Luca. Not because of the marriage, not because of the child, but because of him, the man behind the empire, the man who had started to crack open his heart in ways she never expected. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty for Mia. Luca had been distant, though he still kept his promises. They attended meetings, went over plans for the baby, and discussed the future, but each conversation seemed to carry more weight than the last. It was as if the walls between them had started to crumble, revealing emotions neither of them knew how to handle. One afternoon, Mia sat in the study, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through some documents Luca had left behind. She had learned to keep herself busy, busy enough to push away the confusion, to hide from The growing feelings inside her. But every time Luca entered the room, her heart skipped a beat. Every look, every word he spoke seemed to linger in the air long after he left. She could no longer deny it, she was falling for him. And it scared her more than anything else. Mia. Luca's voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. His gaze held something she couldn't quite decipher, determination mixed with uncertainty. "What is it?" she asked softly, her heart pounding. Luca stepped closer, his expression serious. "We need to talk about the future. Not just the baby, not just the marriage. We need to talk about us." Mia's breath hitched. She set the papers down, unable to look away from him. "I don't know what you mean." Luca exhaled slowly, as though preparing for something difficult. "Mia, this contract was supposed to be a formality. But I can't pretend anymore. I need to be honest with you. I'm in this for more than just the baby. I want you, Mia. I want this to be real." Her world tilted, and for the first time, Mia realized that the man standing before her was as vulnerable as she had become. The contract had started as a means to an end, a calculated move to secure his future, but somewhere along the way, it had evolved. The line between business and emotion had blurred, and now, there was no turning back. Later that evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the air between them felt thick with anticipation. The stars above seemed to mirror the turmoil in Mia's heart. She had always believed that love was something that happened naturally, that it couldn't be forced or coerced. But here she was, caught in the whirlwind of a contract that was supposed to be about obligation, not love. "Mia," Luca's voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady. "I never intended to fall for you. I thought this would be simple. But I can't ignore what's growing between us." Mia turned to face him, her heart racing. "Luca, No," he interrupted gently, stepping closer, his hand reaching for hers. "You don't have to say anything right now. I just need you to understand something. The baby, the marriage, everything, it's real for me now. But it's also about you. It's about us." She didn't know what to say. The world around them seemed to quiet, the noise of their lives fading into the background. What had started as an arrangement for survival had turned into something neither of them had expected. "I don't know if I can be what you want," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can give you what you need." Luca's thumb traced the back of her hand gently. "You already are, Mia. You already are everything I need." The days that followed felt like a blur. Luca had kept his distance emotionally, though his actions spoke volumes. He took care of everything, preparing for the baby, overseeing the business, and ensuring Mia's comfort. But his heart, though silent, was in the small things. The way he looked at her, the subtle gestures, and the care he took in making sure she felt secure. Mia, too, found herself changing. She wasn't just a girl anymore, she was the mother of Luca's child. She wasn't just a pawn in a game of business, she was a partner. One evening, as Mia sat in the nursery, gently touching the baby clothes they had picked out together, she realized how much her feelings had shifted. She had once feared this life, feared the loss of herself in this contract. But now, there was a sense of belonging. Not just in the house, not just in the contract, but in Luca's world. When Luca joined her later that night, sitting beside her on the floor, they shared a quiet moment, their hands touching the soft fabric of the baby's blanket. "I never thought I could feel this way," Mia said, her voice soft but sure. "I never thought I could care for you like this." Luca smiled, his eyes warm with something deeper than before. "Neither did I." The confession, the moment of truth came when Luca made a decision that would change everything. As they sat together in the study, their eyes locked in a silent understanding, he placed an envelope in front of her. "What's this?" Mia asked, her heart suddenly racing. Luca didn't answer immediately. He simply watched her, his gaze intense and searching. "It's the final paperwork for the marriage," he said quietly. "But it's not just a formality anymore, Mia. I want this to be real. I want you to be my wife, in every sense of the word." Mia's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her all at once: this wasn't just a business transaction. It wasn't just about the baby. It was about a life they were building together. A life that was no longer dictated by contracts and expectations, but by choice. Luca's hand reached for hers, and for the first time in their relationship, Mia didn't hesitate. She took his hand, and in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Months passed, and with each passing day, the bond between Mia and Luca grew stronger. Their baby was born, a beautiful reminder of the journey they had taken together. And as they stood together, looking at the life they had built, both of them realized something they hadn't anticipated: love had always been there, just waiting to be discovered. The contract, once the foundation of their relationship, had faded into the background. What remained was something far stronger: trust, understanding, and a deep, abiding love that neither of them had expected but both were grateful for. And as they stood together, watching their child grow, Mia realized that sometimes, the most unexpected relationships could be the most meaningful. What had started as a business arrangement had turned into a family, and in that family, she found something she hadn't known she was searching for: a love that was real,